Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are joining us from in the world today, or whether you're watching on catch up, of course, which is just as valuable. So, hopefully, there's something in the next 15 minutes or so for you. Welcome to the third live edition of the Situation Now panel. This is part of a series we run every month. We are Eco Online here. We work in safety, sustainability, chemical safety, risk management, crisis, emergency response, just about everything you could ever want, really. So, we're live across the world right now on LinkedIn and YouTube. And we're going to be an extension of the Situation Room, which is our main thought leadership panel. We've got another panel of those next week, in case you wanted to catch up with us there. Anyway, today with me on the panel, I've got Billy Pappas, who's one of our emergency management solutions specialists working across the world. And we've got Lydia Vasileva, our senior solutions consultant. So I've got some real people from the front line who are doing this kind of work every day, safety and sustainability. And we've got three really interesting topics in the next 15 minutes that caught our eye in the recent news. So we're going to be talking about the workplace safety report. We're going to be talking about the tragic crash at LaGuardia Airport back in March. And we're going to be talking about extreme weather. So three very different but overlapping topics for awareness, education and action. So let's dive straight into topic one, the workplace safety report. Now we released our annual workplace safety report a few weeks ago. You can pick it up online from Eco Online. It's right there. It's got regionalized versions as well. And there's a link going into the comments as well, so you can follow that. And we had significant interest from organizations around the world. We had some mainstream media pick up as well, because we were surveying nearly 6,000 employees in North America, UK, Ireland, the Nordics, and elsewhere, really, to understand how they perceive safety in 2026. So you can check out the full report, as you said, from ecoonline.com, but a few points jumped out for us. Um, for me, most workers, around 78%, said they feel safe in their workplace, but nearly half of global workers, around about 49%, said they or a relative had been affected by a workplace accident or a work-related illness, something which includes, of course, mental illness. These days, it's just as much a concern as physical illness. Now, over 50 years on from introducing health and safety legislation in most countries, people are still being injured at work. And the nature of that risk is changing, particularly with that risk of mental illness, as we talked about there. But a new observation this year really caught my eye. And most of the workers made a link between safety and productivity. So that really is something that most businesses obviously can recognize in terms of the effect on the bottom line. But 91% believe that a safer workplace makes them more productive. So there's really changing the whole notion for me, that safety investments are a cost center because in fact they can directly influence profitability. Billy, what jumped out for you?
Absolutely. And so, I think the point that you brought in terms of mental illness, the point that actually jumped out to me was that of those workers that were in the report, 57% said it was stress related. So you would think maybe it was environmental or maybe it was some safety feature, but the mental stress is just catastrophic at a lot of different levels. And then, of course, bringing in that little bit of emergency management, crisis management aspect to the call as well. Cyber attacks are the number one perceived business threat in 2026. So that was also very interesting to me, especially because there's a lot of talk about climate, which I know we'll talk about later, but cybersecurity being up there jumped out for sure.
Yeah, it's a great point to pick up, Billy. The nature of that risk changing, really, and I think those 2 points for me are linked as well because I was reading that cybersecurity is a major stress driver, of course, if particularly if you're working in that function, but of course for leadership as well. So yeah, thanks, Billy. Good points. Lydia, over to you.
Thank you so much. And for me, actually, off the back of an event we were having as a health and safety event in Birmingham, it was mostly around the lone working side of the reporting. So the couple of numbers that stood out to me was that quite a high number of people who identify themselves as lone workers, which, by the way, that means somebody that is not seen and or heard as they're doing a part of the job that they're actually doing in the day to day. And the fact that 30% of those lone workers in the UK then also have been a victim of a workplace incident. What really that, and sort of the really sad takeaway if off the back of that is that obviously there isn't enough focus on those lone workers when such a high percentage of those incidents affect those specific individuals. And the other point, again, around lone working, and it ties very nicely back into your point, David and Billy, around mental health. The second biggest concern among workers that are lone working was stress and mental health conditions and concerns.
Yeah, exactly. You pick a right point, Lydia. And we've done a lot of work, of course, on lone workers. And what surprised me when we hear some of those stories as well is that some of them are in areas that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So actually, people, they're not lone workers the whole time, but for a significant portion of their day. And that really is quite a concern for getting them help if they need it, or just helping them to feel connected to the organization. So yeah, thanks for picking out those points. And as I said, if you want to listen to or read more about it, please do pick up the overall, and you'll get a chance to see everything else we've been connecting with. So the second topic we were going to touch on was the LaGuardia crash in March, which was a dreadful crash at LaGuardia, where an Air Canada jet sadly struck a fire truck on the runway, tragically claiming the lives of the pilots. And it could, of course, have been even worse. It was a really, really bad incident. The Federal Aviation Administration announced a $23 million initiative just recently to install vehicle movement area transmitters on nearly 2,000 vehicles, about 1,900 vehicles across 44 US airports, ready to enhance runway safety and visibility, of course. And the preliminary incident report noted that the truck lacked a transponder and the driver failed to recognize the stop warning before impact. Now, we do a lot of work with airports, and it's growing rapidly as well, which demonstrates to me the complications of interrelated risks across these highly complex ecosystems. I was in the Royal Air Force, the military, for 20 years, so I was very familiar with airport movements. But when you look at the commercial world, airlines, ground handling agencies, airport vehicles, they're all under immense time pressure. And as the International Air Transport Association, IATA, have noticed, they're forecasting global air travel demand to more than double by 2050. So it's getting worse. But this was the first major crash in 34 years. And Billy, I think if I could just turn over to you, what did you pick out from there?
Yeah, and I think it's important to also note I am based in New York, so I fly out of LaGuardia quite often. So having the crash so close to home is something wild to even conceptualize, especially in today's day and age. The points that I wanted to bring up is I think for those that may not be aware in the U.S. as well, with the government shutdowns happening quite frequently, we also have a massive lack in risk with air controllers. So you think about that air traffic doubling, but then the support to manage that air traffic is completely at risk and also being compromised constantly. So now our flight safety is just completely changing. In terms of the other part of crisis management, I would like to also make the point that airports are kind of like mini cities, like you said, David, right? There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of different aspects to it. So we kind of have to treat it like it's its own almost jurisdiction in some regard. Now, the other last point that I wanted to bring up was that there was this massive project that was completed in 2024 for LaGuardia's upgrade. I think it was around $8 billion that was projected in this project, and it was made to upgrade terminals, general infrastructure, but also, and this could also just be me being naive, right? But how much of that was meant to go towards maybe those safety features? You said that now there's more money going into the transponders, but was the 8 billion just to make it look pretty or to actually make it safe and efficient as well?
Yeah, you make a really powerful point, of course, there is that it is all absolutely connected. And I love your point about the mini cities as well. That's very true. When you think of the the moving parts, not just airside, but everything that's obviously on the side of the passengers and passenger handling and check-in, everything, from the moment you include all transport infrastructure as well. This is a phenomenally complex environment. So yes, you make really powerful points. Thanks, Billy. And Lydia, what jumped out for you from that particular news item?
For me, was actually even extending it further from the complexity that you're finding within that individual airport and the complex ecosystem that obviously yourself and Billy spoke about, was actually even broadening that up ever so much. Every accident like this has huge cascading effects, and not only within the US and North America, but then it cascades across globally. So every one of these, obviously highly damaging from a loss of personnel and human loss, but also how many other travel elements have been disrupted, logistical structures, all of that. So it's not just about, and even though that should be enough, but it's not just about human loss. It's just about imagining that huge impact that it's having globally from this one really devastating event. That was the first thing that came to mind. But the second one was, I guess, again, slightly naively to Billy's point, is I don't want to think that there was a lot of, but imagine how many near misses have already been there. And does airports like LaGuardia, do they have access to this information? Have they seen this ahead of time? Was there something, obviously with hindsight in mind, it's very easy to judge and to make those measurements, but genuinely, would it have been more powerful to be more reactive and a more proactive, apologies, more proactive versus being reactive now off the back of it, having that investment versus thinking ahead of time and saying like, hey, we need a huger investment here into health and safety versus then, off the back.
Indeed, and exactly as you say, Lydia, the point about near misses is what we see with all our environment, health and safety work, of course, because that EHS work builds out near misses as being a chance to avoid it happening the next time, of course, isn't it? So you're absolutely right to call out the near misses. Okay, well, just moving on quickly then for our third topic, extreme weather. Now, the background to this, there were two particularly worrying stories for me last week. The forecasters are talking about one of the worst El Nino systems in history down in the Pacific Ocean, and then, of course, with global impacts, alongside estimates of potentially $900 billion. I can't even get my head around that figure, really, of potential damage from extreme weather over the next year or so. Now, the report came out last week with companies expecting extreme weather events such as flooding, heavy rain, and all the associated works there to drive that 900 billion in financial losses. Now, those impacts, sort of picking up on Lydia's point, really, not just from the direct issues, the direct losses of damage, if you like, but from associated areas like supply chain disruptions, lost revenue, and asset impairments, and so on as well. So an interconnected issue, really. And that data came from more than 11,000 companies who, through the 2025 Carbon Disclosure Project questionnaire, as well as over 1,000 cities, states, and regions. So this is a truly global picture of the potential damage and worry we've got. Now, when you couple that with the meteorological agencies who are forecasting this potential super El Nino, that climate pattern in the Pacific, by this autumn and the winter, really, as the seas warm at a very fast pace. And that's got real global implications because, of course, that can shift jet streams, and 2027 is likely to become the hottest year ever recorded in human history. So real issues around wildfires and everything else that goes with that as well. So the takeaway for me is the need to see through recent trends to downplay environmental risks. We have seen a lot of that, really, and the need for sustainability action, but not only to build carbon reduction into business planning, if you like, but also fundamentally those crisis and emergency response plans for when the weather hits. Billy, what jumped out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the weather is changing, whether we like it or not. And I think now it's not really even preparedness. We're almost getting to the point of mitigation, right? Because every dollar that we can invest in saving, and according to the National Institute of Building Sciences, you save $13 in that regard. So that 900 billion of damage, you can start chipping away at those damage by just being a little bit more proactive in how you want to deal with those crisis plans. And the last point I'll bring up too is that, there's a lot of stress happening with the Federal Emergency Management Agency and how there might be more pressure on states, United States, to actually have to deal with these climatic emergencies. So just some food for thought as we go into the Mid-Atlantic hurricane season next month.
Brilliant. Thanks, Billy. Yeah, really good points in making that clear point about investment to save, if you like, in a sense. Lydia, what jumped out for you?
For me, from that same report that you were talking about, David, two numbers were really, really staggering to me. So we're talking about potential $900 billion of exposure to projects, yet only 35% of organizations classify extreme weather as a material risk. That to me is a huge, huge perception gap. When it's such a big number, yet so little companies are prioritizing that, it starts having the conversation around like, where do we then prioritize that otherwise?
Yeah.
So again, slightly from a naive standpoint, but if I was to be given, let's say, a magic wand, something that I would sort of ask for folks to change when it comes to their perception, is moving this idea of extreme weather from a rare events category when we are looking at risk and moving it into the same area where we look at supply chain planning, insurance strategies, capital allocation. This is not a unique and rare happening thing anymore. This is now something that we need to be talking about as part of the day-to-day.
Yeah, that's a very powerful point to come together, Lydia. As you say, I think particularly because a lot of the companies and organizations may be drawn into this risk really now have not previously had the experience of that. So this could be something they're completely unprepared for. And it's well worth making sure that plan is not just a dusty something tucked away on a bookshelf. It's actually something that's exercised, checked, rehearsed on a regular basis and ready for when it needs to kick in. Brilliant, thank you. Well, that was very quick. As we know, the Situation Live is a very quick 15-minute review over 3 topics that caught our eye in the news recently. So thanks to Billy and to Lydia for joining me today and putting out some great points, really. And thanks to you, of course, also for joining us again, whether you joined us live on LinkedIn or YouTube, or whether you're watching us on Catch Up. We hope you found it useful and maybe just tweaked your interest to maybe go away and just look at some of those crisis plans perhaps, or just think things through and how your organization might be more helped and more ready for when you need it. So there's more on our main Situation Room platform on LinkedIn, so you can see articles there. There's an article there this month on whether the environment still matters, and many of the last changes over the last year or so have brought that into question. So have a look at what we've got to say. And there's a panel next week on the 27th of May. If you get a chance to join us, you can sign up by following the link in the article on EcoOnline's LinkedIn main feed. So wherever you are in the world, wherever you joined us from, thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Billy and to Lydia. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.